Hello, my name is Julia Streets and welcome to the podcast series Streets Talks 2. In each episode, I interview leaders from some of the most influential firms, bodies and initiatives in the financial services industry, and we explore what's at the very forefront of innovation and change. We think about the challenges facing clients and also the industry at large, and we uncover the opportunities that exist both today and also as we look ahead. We hope you enjoy the series, and you can find it on all good podcast channels, and all the episodes are listed on our website, streetsconsulting.com. You can also find these episodes using the hashtag StreetsTalks2, and thank you for listening, and welcome to Streets Talks 2 VOLANTE. VOLANTE Technologies is a global provider of cloud payments and financial messaging solutions, all designed to accelerate digital transformation. VOLANTE serves as a trusted partner to more than 100 banks, financial institutions, market infrastructures, clearinghouses, and corporate treasuries in more than 35 countries. And the company's solutions and services process millions of transactions and trillions in value every day, powering 4 of the top 5 corporate banks and 40% of all US commercial bank deposits. And joining us today, it's a pleasure to welcome Vijay Adiraju, who is their CEO. He is a lifelong entrepreneur. He co-founded VOLANTE in 2001 when he saw a market opportunity for technology to accelerate automation and innovation in financial services. As CEO, Vijay leads with a very clear vision: to think big, remember to give something back, and never shy away from risk. And today he's also joined by Rachel Hunt, VP of Growth Marketing. Rachel is responsible for VOLANTE's global go-to-market growth through the development of compelling customer-centric value propositions. Her background includes leading real-time payments marketing for ACI, heading IDC's EMEA financial services practice, and managing global marketing for Temenos. So I know it's going to be a fantastic combination and a fantastic conversation. Vijay, welcome.
It's wonderful to be here on the show, and it's my pleasure.
And Rachel, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's lovely to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this because payments is of its time. And when you think about the profound impact of coronavirus on both businesses, yes, but also even further into the general public around the world. And I'm really curious to know and to hear your thoughts about what the payments industry can do to meet the changing needs of our post-COVID world. Vijay, can I come to you first of all?
So right from there, the customer behavior, the experience of the customer, experience of an employee going to an office or the part of the society, or how we are meeting individuals, or even the changes that are happening every day of our life. Like I keep saying these things, everything has become digital now. I don't need to carry my wallet in my pocket now. All I carry is my smartphone. Wherever I go, I make a digital payment. Even without going anywhere, I can do a digital payment from wherever I am. If I can get QR code or whatever it is, or even phone numbers, I can just make payments worldwide. It's amazing changes that happened during the COVID and afterwards as well. Interesting fact is the International Monetary Fund mentioned that global economy has shrunk by 4.4% in 2020. Which is worse than the depression, actually, a Great Depression, I mean. But the important thing is, while that is happening, or while that has happened, the payments volumes have increased substantially, and the payments are going through like e-payments and digital payments, wire transfers. For example, US Wire, ACH, their volumes have gone so high that they were never seen that kind of volumes before. In SWIFT, for example, the volumes in 2021 are much higher than pre-pandemic in 2019. So everywhere you see the transaction volumes have gone up so much in the payments world. And the challenge, I would say, is for the financial institutions or the payment providers on how do they ensure that they have done well and also they are prepared to do a lot more as they go forward. And those are the things like who needs payment, when they need it, can you provide in a manner that they get it in a proper time fashion and in the way in which they want. I think as we go forward, access to the capital and in a timely fashion is going to be very critical. And as citizens of this globe, I guess, we all have to really help each other in achieving that, whether you're a vendor, whether you're a bank, whether you're a financial institution. But there's so many individuals in the world who are unbanked. There's so many people who are unemployed. So many businesses are struggling. So we need to get all of them to be inclusive and make them very comfortable that we're all in this together and see what part we can play to make their lives much more comfortable.
And it's important, isn't it? Because we talk about financial inclusion and we talk about the democratization of financial services and be able to extend that capability and reach. And thank you for not only painting a picture about how the world has shifted and the specificity of that shift, but also thinking about what the future looks like and be able to extend those services even further. Rachel, can I bring you in here? I would really love to ask you, what, when you hear those challenges and those concerns, what it is you're doing to help address them?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Julia, and probably want to emphasize the fact that the industry is dealt with the challenges of the pandemic with incredible resilience. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that fact and not underestimate how much the importance of the payment systems and keeping the economy going has been fundamental. And as Vijay has said, we've seen digital adoption sort of accelerate forward 3 years ahead. I think McKinsey sort of did a recent survey on that. So incredible mega trend that is happening. And there's a couple of building blocks, I think, to make sure that we're successful going forward. You sort of mentioned, well, what are we doing as an industry, I would say, to make sure that financial inclusion follows that mega trend of digital payments adoption? There's a couple of things that were already in place. I think the importance was that it was an accelerator of a trend that was already happening. If you think about open banking phenomena, for example, which is opening up the ecosystem to payment providers outside of the traditional players like the banking institutions or the payment services providers. So opening up to the fintech industry, certainly in Europe, that has an incredible benefit, I think, because we're not going to be successful in digital payments on our own. It's going to take a village to build on that success and making sure that we take all of the stakeholders together. So the banks, the fintechs, the PSPs, but also the corporates and governments. I think one of the big questions, whether we're looking at Europe, Asia Pac, or the US, is how are the individual regulators and governments going to ensure that we have strong financial inclusion with regulation like open banking in Europe. But there's also another fundamental as well, is that we're moving to real time. So personally, I haven't used cash in about 15 years. So I've been a complete digital early adopter, I would say, more for security reasons. I don't like having cash in my pocket, but also work with a charity that is for elderly people. So very conscious of the fact that when the pandemic happened, trying to do online payments for people who didn't have internet, who didn't have a mobile device, it was challenging. But one thing that is important with real-time payments is that you can actually include people who are underbanked, who don't have cards. So access to cards is not a right for everyone. It's a privilege. And you have to have a bank account, and a bank account that offers you a card. Real-time payments, as we've seen in India or in Asia, is not card-based. It can be provided, over a phone. And most people around the world have got a phone, at least a feature phone, if it's not a smartphone. So real-time payments, I think, is really important as part of the industry adoption. And then linked to the open banking is obviously APIs, and having standardized APIs so we can do the connectivity between that ecosystem. We mentioned, it's going to take a village. We also need to have standardized APIs so that everybody can make payments and be part of that ecosystem.
And it's really important, isn't it? Because there we talked about sort of some of the driving changes, the key industry drivers that are going to accelerate and amplify and extend the capability as well. But also, I think one thing that's really fascinating at the moment is that some of those infrastructure players and some of you talked about policy and regulation, I think particularly to central banks. And Vijay, I know that you've been thinking a lot about central bank digital currencies, and certainly there's an enormous amount of discussion about it. So I'd love to bring your thoughts in here about the role of CBDCs.
It is a really important point. CBDCs, as they're called, central bank digital currencies, they are the ones which has the ability to democratize the funds without the downside speculation about the risks involved in those things. And we have seen so much happening. And before we go into that, actually, look at the banks, how they have to look at these things. Most of the banks or the financial institutions or the payment service providers have legacy systems, and they need to be prepared for these changes, and they need to create infrastructures to support those. If they don't do it, new players, the fintech providers are going to do it. So it's a challenge for them. So the banks have to really look beyond just what they can do today, but they have to be listening to and working closely with the central banks and see how they can work together. And some of the countries have already jumped into it, and some of the banks have jumped into it. For example, Bahamas have already introduced the digital currency. Their CBDC have included this new thing in to combine all these 700 small islands they have. And Cambodia, for example, they have done a wonderful job. And then they have created a digital currency. And the Bank of England is talking to so many banks, retailers, and members in the public to decide on what the policy should be. The list goes on, like in JPMC has started stablecoin 1 year, I guess. And then there is so much of happening in those areas. But the main important thing is, are you, meaning as a financial institution or a payment service provider, are you making all the efforts to support that change that's going to happen? Do you have the correct infrastructure or the modernization initiatives in your bank to support those things? And are you working with other partners who can provide you those facilities? And it's going to be three things, I guess, right? One is it has to be digital native. It has to be modernization, basically. Cryptocurrencies going to be. If you look at all the spectrum of things that's happening, legacy infrastructures are not going to be able to support them. So you need to, as a bank or as a service provider, you need to think about a lot more things differently and be ready for those things. So working with all these policy makers and be a part of that whole ecosystem is very, very important for every one of us. And as a vendor, we are also working closely with some of them, including the banks, to see how we can make sure that we can support our banks, our customers, make it ready for them so that that will be easy for them to transition or support those new types of currencies when and if they come.
And what I love about the conversation so far is we've really been talking at the highest macro level about some of the drivers and some of the challenges that the industry as a whole is facing. We've brought it back down to some really key areas: open banking, instant real-time payments, microservices and APIs, as you were describing, Rachel. And then we've also thought about it from a really infrastructure, kind of how payments are done. Some real examples. And Vijay, you were talking there about Bahamas, you were talking about Cambodia, and also the US 2 programs that are going on at the moment. And when I started the introduction, I talked about VOLANTE's role, what you do, and the fact that you're powering 4 of the top 5 corporate banks, 40% of all US commercial bank deposits, 70% of worldwide card traffic. And also, those in the industry will know that underneath all of this, as we have been alluding to, is the need for standardization. So the initiative around ISO 20022 and the payments messages as well. So I guess my next question is, where do you fit in? What do you do that actually empowers the industry and also helps your customers address these enormous challenges?
Yeah, Julia, that's a really good question. We get involved in so many parts of the payments value chain, but one of the key things that we do with our customers is help them to manage all of this change. So as you mentioned, we've not just got the pandemic, we've got regulation, we've got innovation, thousands of new methods of payments that you have to onboard. And all of these things will have an impact on your payment services. I mean, traditionally, payments hadn't changed much in the past 40 years. And in the past decade, we're just going through a huge cycle of innovation. So one of the first things that we do, and especially with regards to ISO 20022, is help the banks modernize their payment systems. ISO 20022 is a great benefit in terms of standardization, in terms of enriched data, but it has an impact on pretty much every single system that you have within the bank, and in particular payments. And one of the big challenges is managing the long tail of ISO 20022 migration, because we have international payments which are touched upon, obviously with SWIFT and the CBPR plus ISO 20022 migration, but we also have domestic ISO 20022 migration projects, whether it's in the US or in the UK or indeed across Europe and Asia Pac. So managing all of this migration and also the different little flavors of ISO 20022, because we talk about standardization, but of course in our industry, we like to have our regional flavors as well and our local flavors. And so that unified ISO 20022 migration is a big part of the projects that we've been doing. But that's not the only thing. We're also moving, as we mentioned, to a broader payment ecosystem, increasingly going towards the cloud. It's not just a deployment method, it's a fundamental change in the way that you do your business. And there's several ways of looking at it. VOLANTE, we pride ourselves, we're a cloud native, ISO 20022 native solution. And we've helped some of the largest corporate banks enable their own banking as a service journey. So being able to open up to their non-core business by onboarding partners into their payments solutions and ecosystem. But we also offer our smaller, mid-sized banks a path towards innovation with our payments as a service solution. The same VOLANTE, VOLPAY technology, but within our own software as a service environment. And all of these things just really isolate the rest of the business from change. So there's low risk. You don't have to do all the rip and replace. You really have something that is standardized, unified, modern, and you can take on all of the new payment methods first, for example, like real time, and sort of migrate your existing payments rails over.
And when people talk about sort of migrating systems and payments rails, I mean, this is absolutely the conversation of the day, isn't it? How do you transform? And so thank you for laying out not only the most technical detail around ISO 20022, and you mentioned about the SWIFT migration, but also at the highest levels about digital transformation and how you achieve that, and without compromising risk along the way, which of course is everybody's big question, which is how do I transform without impacting? Because there we're talking about the ability to put a card into an ATM, make a payment, whether that's a corporate payment or a personal payment, and that can never be compromised. I mean, imagine the impact on populations if they cannot get access to cash or indeed any kind of payment in whatever form as well. So it's so important, isn't it? So I'm going to ask a question. It's a slightly odd one, but it is intended to be. I always ask all senior executives who come on the show about their favourite piece of regulation or policy. So I'm really keen to hear from you both about what is the piece you're paying attention to most right now. Rachel, I'm coming to you first of all.
This must be the oddest question I've ever heard. It's not a usual thing to ask what your payment piece of regulation, but it's a great question. We mentioned open banking, so the Payment Services Directive in Europe. That was quite a fundamental change. Not everybody regulates. The US is usually light touch and is driven by the market, but certainly in Europe, just having the Payment Services Directive has created a momentum. But generally, also, I like the regulations that look at onboarding the rest of the population, and the examples of countries like India or Singapore are really quite interesting in the regulation they've put in place.
Wonderful. Vijay, can I ask you the same question? We were talking there about, financial inclusion, CBDCs. Is there a piece of governance or regulation that you're paying particular attention to right now?
CBDCs definitely yes. And especially interested in what the US is going to do about it, because as Rachel mentioned, US generally don't regulate much, especially on the open banking side and all that. It's taking a lot more time. But I think the two programs the US is running, I'm very interested in knowing what they're going to do about that. In the US, the digital currencies, once the policy is made, I think there'll be a huge shift in the payments industry. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. So that's exciting for me. And again, in India and Singapore, as Rachel mentioned, there are a lot of things that they are doing which are very good, especially in terms of financial inclusion. I always come back to that. And recently, I've gone to a market, kind of a flea market, where everybody has a QR code there, and all you do is just make a payment. So easy, and nobody's taking cash. I think pretty much the entire world can close down their mint machines, as we go forward. So that's my prediction as we go forward. And then hopefully all these digital currencies will take over completely.
Wonderful. Well, you heard it here first. These are the predictions of Vijay. So I love it. Wonderful. Listen, I hope everybody's enjoying the conversation as much as I am. This is Streets Talks 2. Streets Talks 2 Volante. And of course, you can find the episodes on our website, streetsconsulting.com, and search for us using the hashtag Streets Talks 2. So I'm really keen to... I can't believe how time disappears on podcasts. It's amazing, isn't it? But I'm really keen now to think about, what does the road ahead hold? And what you're particularly thinking about as you look ahead, and also what advice are you giving clients as they plan ahead as well? Vijay, I'm very keen, as you've made some bold predictions there, what are you thinking about as you look at the pathway ahead?
The thing is, as we have been talking for the last half an hour or so, I guess, the payments world is changing. That's for sure. Everybody knows it. This is brought in part by the advent of new breeds of payments or businesses. We talk about digital native or cryptocurrencies. So there is a need for new types of payment services, right? So when we talk to the clients or when I talk to the CIOs, do they have the right infrastructure? Okay. It's very difficult to have a foolproof future protection, but do you have some open architectures or strategic stack which can support all these things? And then also thinking about not just about introducing new products to the consumers, but more about their services should be more customer centric, and there should be more value added services they need to add. But for all that to happen, it has to be cost effective, and it should be resilient, it should be scalable, and the bank should be able to do business anywhere in the world in a quicker fashion. So the cloud will give you that advantage to these financial institutions, and then the cost will go down. The cost of getting new services added will be much cheaper. So all these things are being discussed with lots of our customers, especially the tier one banks. They are very receptive to this. And again, we have to be pragmatic. Nothing changes overnight. So it does take time, but the thinking is in the right place. Everybody is watching out for these things, and they are investing in the right places. And again, not to brag about it, but they're also looking at Volante as a good strategic partner for the long term.
Wonderful. I have to say, it's been a fantastic conversation. We've covered an enormous amount in a really short period of time for some of the high-level industry drivers that affect people both on a personal basis, but also on a corporate basis. We've talked about regulation and policy. We've also talked about some of the industry dynamics that will empower change, as well as some of the technical ways of addressing that change, both in terms of infrastructures, but also how they can be delivered in the cloud as well, and to get into some of the detail, even around ISO 20022. Do you know, personally, I'm always delighted when ISO 20022 comes up in conversation. It's been a joy. Thank you both so much for joining us. Rachel, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Julia. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
Pleasure. And Vijay, thank you for all your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
So to everybody who's listening, if you're wondering how to get in touch with the guests and indeed Volante Technologies, you can go to the website www.volantetech.com. Find them on Twitter @VolanteTech, and of course on LinkedIn as well. I've been Julia Streets. You've been listening to me talking to Volante Technologies, and tune in again for some future episodes. Thanks for listening.